So we're officially on now. We want to welcome our good friend and state senator, Senator Holly Mitchell. Senator, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with some of your constituents here at UHA about some issues of the day and answer our questions. And as you know, we're recording this, so we'll post this to our website so folks can listen for themselves and, you know, get an idea of what you will be doing, assuming you win the final election for supervisor of the second district. So,
and I certainly appreciate you all affording me the opportunity and spending some time with me this evening. So thank you.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure.
You're welcome.
So let me, and by the way, just so you're clear, so everyone knows who's on the call, it's John Heath, Dr. Helen Sellers, Joanne Fountain, Tony McDonald-Tabor, and we're expecting Daryl Grayson. We're all board members of United Homeowners Association. All right. So first question is, explain to us why you ran for the Board of Supervisors while at the same time you had been, and I assume still are, a declared candidate for Secretary of State. Can you give us some perspective on your thinking there and what your plan is?
That's a great question. I am in my last term in the state Senate. And so I term out in 2022. When you're in your last term, there are limits in your ability to fundraise at the state level. And so it's a really artificially low limit. And so it is very common practice for colleagues of mine in the state legislature who are in their final year to, you know, explore other state opportunities, to have other committees so you can continue to fundraise at the state level, which I've continued to do to help maintain my leadership position, quite frankly, in the Senate. You know, I chair the Senate Budget Committee. That makes me a member of the leadership team, and being a part of the leadership team with the pro tem. A part of that is helping, quite frankly, other Democrats get elected to the Senate. And so I want to maintain my leadership position and maintain my top fundraiser, top donor to leadership kind of status, frankly. And so I looked around at potential options for other offices I might like to consider. And so that's why I opened the committee. It is primarily a place where I can fundraise into. It could potentially be an option for me, but you should know that my heart and soul is committed to a successful bid for the LA County Board of Supervisors. Got it.
So in your mind, there's no conflict or issue with you being a declared candidate for both of those seats? Because
technically, I'm not a declared candidate for that. I have opened a committee, and you can look, any number of people open various committees. It's more considered, you know, it's not a declared candidacy. I have sitting members who have, some people have multiple committees open at the same time. There are people who have committees open already for my seat, to run for election for my seat when I term out in 2022. And so it's closer akin to a search committee, but it is not a declared candidacy.
Got it. Thanks for clearing that up.
That seat isn't even open yet to officially declare one's candidacy. So no, I don't see it as a conflict at all because it is not a declared candidacy.
Understood. Anyone have any follow-up on that?
When officially would the, assuming you won the supervisor position, when would that term start?
Good question. As I understand it, with the November election, they'd have to ratify that election. I believe they would then take the oath of office in December, and that term would then start December of 2020. And they probably have, much like the state legislature, what they call like an organizing day where everyone takes the oath of office. They may meet a day or two, but the full, you know, sessions probably don't start until January. So I believe whoever wins in November would take the oath of office in December.
Okay, okay. So then does that mean that you would vacate 1 year of your senator seat?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Just wanted to get that clear. Okay, because
yeah.
there's a crossover, right?
Yes.
Okay.
If I am successful, the day before you're sworn in, I would resign. That was my experience when Curran Price, you'll recall, vacated his Senate seat early when he ran for LA City Council and won that seat. And so I ran in a special, and so I was elected September of 2013. And literally the day before I was sworn into the Senate, I submitted my letter of resignation to the Assembly. So it would be a similar process.
I see. Okay. So now that you said that you're committed heart and soul to winning that supervisor seat, we can really ask you the hard questions.
Please,
Yes.
please do.
Helen says the gloves are coming off now.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay.
Well, since you mentioned fundraising, Senator, let me just ask kind of a follow-up, but a somewhat different question. You accepted donations from some independent expenditure committees, as did your opponent. Tell us a little bit about, you know, especially for people who may not know kind of what that means and how that works. Tell us how you as an elected official are comfortable taking those kind of donations from IEs without becoming beholden to them in terms of how you make and set policy decisions going forward.
I'm glad you asked the question. And so I'm gonna answer the technical legal aspect of the way you frame the question. Then I'm gonna get to, I think, the true root of your question.
Got it, thanks.
Independent expenditure committees are just that. I don't accept that. There are laws that prohibit me from being engaged with an independent expenditure committee. Those are committees who have a vested interest and want to support a particular candidate, and they literally run a separate operation. So not only can I not accept money from an IE, I also cannot coordinate the campaign with an IE. So you will see mailers and billboards and other things that IEs pay for that are not a part of my campaign. So like they cannot use my actual logo. They can use images of me because as a public official, once those images are on websites or kind of in the universe, anybody can pick those images and use them. That's how sometimes you'll see images in a negative mailer. You say, how did they get that picture? I don't control my image, unfortunately.
Right.
Because sometimes I would pick better pictures. If you're gonna talk bad about me, at least use an attractive picture, please. Anyway,
Right.
So there are laws that separate independent expenditures. What I will go further to say, which I think is the underlying issue of your question, is I have accepted corporate dollars. That's true. From some of the entities that I have, gotten to know. They've gotten to know me in my work over the last 10 years. I do not take tobacco money and oil money. That is a personal conviction, if you will. When I ran Crystal Stairs, given the tobacco industry's history of taking advantage of marginalized communities, if you will, we didn't even invest our pension funds at Crystal Stairs in tobacco companies. It was just something I personally felt strongly about, and about an organization that was founded by 2 Black women that served largely Black and brown children should send a very strong message. So I've never taken tobacco money as an elected, and again, have worked hard to separate that industry from the work I do. And go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and I think the bigger picture for me, it's really important that we talk about motivation and the role money plays in politics. I love the Shirley Chisholm famous motto, unbought and
unbossed. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And while, as Jess Sundrew said, money is the mother's milk of politics. It takes money for these mailers. It takes money to buy TV ads. It takes money to hire campaign staff and to have a campaign manager. I am also clear about why I ran for office, my personal convictions, and will always vote my conscience. I chose not to take oil money when I was first elected to the Assembly because I represented the Inglewood oil fields, the largest urban oil field in the country. And it was just too complicated. I wanted my constituents to be absolutely clear about my orientation and my politics. You know, I've worked very hard. I've carried several bills to ban hydraulic fracturing. And so I chose not to take oil money just so people, my constituents were comfortable in my position. But again, I tend to push back because, you know, I say unequivocally, I'm not for sale. I certainly wouldn't be for sale for the campaign limits. I came into public office with my good name, and I intend to leave public office with my good name. And I'm just not for sale. I don't know how else to say it.
Got it. It looks like one of our other board members has joined. Daryl Grayson is on. How you doing, Daryl? Say hi to Senator Mitchell.
Hello, how's everybody doing?
Good evening. Fine, thank you.
Good. Anybody want to take the next question or follow up on that last point? Don't all rush to the mic at once, because I got a whole bunch of questions right here.
Okay. Do you have a question specifically, John, about the Inglewood oil fields?
Why don't you ask that one, Joanne, if you like.
Well, Senator, what is your position on what should happen, if anything, with the Inglewood oil fields? It's a source of a lot of angst in our community.
And I share that angst. You know, I first started working with the community with regard to the Inglewood oil fields back when I was CEO of Crystal Stairs, because I was invited to a public meeting once, and I realized they were talking about their public notice and their evacuation plan. And sitting there in that meeting, I realized that they didn't really know the community or who was in the community. I realized that I had hundreds of family daycare facilities in the immediate surroundings, and it wasn't on their radar screen. And so my point is, my relationship and my advocacy around Inglewood goes back to before I was elected. One of the first bills I introduced when I was elected in the Assembly was a ban on hydraulic fracturing. I introduced it again in the Senate, and quite frankly, I couldn't get them out of the House of Origin. I lost my front teeth on both of those bills. But that kind of set the motion in terms of the work that I've done collaboratively with members of the legislature and key stakeholders around really trying to force the issue around resident protection. I'm proud to say I have the endorsement of both the CLCV and the Sierra Club because of my work around Inglewood. I currently support the 2,500-foot setback, but fundamentally the long-term plan, I think, for the oil fields and the Baldwin Hills Conservancy is a good plan. The challenge is, will any of us be alive to see it come to fruition? Because the plan is, when the oil fields are no longer producing, that land will transition over to the Conservancy, and we'll be able to have the largest urban park in the country, larger than Central Park. The problem is they're continuing to find oil there. And what can we do as government to expedite the closure of those wells? I think Culver City, who about a third of the wells are actually technically in Culver City, their city council have been very aggressive and very vocal. And I think that as a community of the Second District, you know, it's not only Inglewood, it's the Jefferson Park oil wells and the West Adams oil wells that are actually in closer proximity to residents. So those are issues I will continue to work on. The goal will always be closure, to always acknowledge that, you know, oil drilling in residential communities, I don't believe is what's safer, is in the best interest of the neighborhood. Particularly when you consider the fact that those neighborhoods are predominantly people of color, and certainly in Jefferson Park and West Adams tend to be lower income people. And so as we talk about health disparities and wealth disparities, those are all issues I think that continue to fuel our advocacy around the ultimate closure of Inglewood.
So just asking a quick follow-up, Senator, it sounds like you would be supportive of the efforts going on in Culver City I haven't had a chance to really drill down and understand exactly what they're proposing, but I think they have an amortization study where they're essentially trying to determine the present value of the cost of shutting down the fields and then figure out how that gets paid for. Is that something that you would support across the board?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's private land and private company,
Right.
and so the rub between the role government can play in intervening is not, you know, black and white. And so I think Culver City is investigating a variety of creative ways to look into it. Case in point, the West Adams, the Allen Co. property, you know, is owned by the Catholic Church. Catholic Church is interested in walking away from that property. Well, one week they are, the next week they aren't. So I've been engaged with the mayor, the governor, to really figure out if the Catholic Church wants to walk away from it, what their sale price would be. Now, we're not going to let them off the hook for remediation. That's the big ticket item. You know, it's not just the value of the land today, but what it will cost to clean up that land.
Right.
That therein lies the dilemma, and I never believe that the general public should be responsible for that. The polluter should be responsible for that. And so how we hold oil companies accountable to make sure they clean up the land is always a critical point. It's not just about buying it, it's about who pays for remediation. And that's an ongoing challenge.
Yes.
Taxpayers shouldn't have to. We weren't the beneficiaries, we weren't the stockholders. So why should we pay to clean up their mess?
Exactly. Have you or are you aware of any of your colleagues at state legislature level or otherwise that have had conversations with the Sentinel Peak folks or any of the, I don't know who the property owners reps are, but has any conversation happened around that whole issue of, okay, you know, we know this drilling and harvesting gas and oil has a finite life cycle. What's the plan for 50 years from now? Are you aware of any conversations like that? To my knowledge, and I can't, there is a plan, there is a agreement that's been on the books for many, many years. Again, it's when there's no more oil to be extracted from the soil. And the agreement is that the land would be available for sale. Now, if that agreement includes remediation, that part I don't know. Okay.
That was a part of the entire Baldwin Hills Conservancy, quite frankly, creation, and the multiple levels of government that have been involved in that whole aspect. You know, the Baldwin Hills Conservancy is funded primarily by the state. You know, that's the Conservancy the Conservancy Board are appointed by the governor. So we've always worked hard to make sure that it was a diverse board and a board of community residents, all of whom are very progressive and ultimately want that oil field shut down and are prepared to subsume all of that property into the Conservancy. The remediation piece I don't know about, so I'll have to follow up on that.
Okay, thanks, and we will too. Any other follow-ups on this point, guys, regarding the oil field?
Yeah, I have a question. Pleasure to meet you, Senator. This is
Same
Gerald
here, Mr. Grayson.
speaking. So how would you describe your position on this issue relative to Herb Wesson's position on this issue and why we should favor you over him?
I don't know that I know Mr. Wesson's position, although I remember hearing him in the primary say that he's the only person that's actually ever closed an oil field, which technically I don't believe is true. I think that he played a role in temporarily shutting down Allen Co., but Allen Co. reopened. And so I think it gets back to that earlier point I made in terms of, you know, this nuanced role between government and private enterprise, a private company on private land. And so as you know, I recall in the few times all of us were together and this issue came up, really all of the candidates, as I recall in the primary, you know, were supportive of closing the oil field. You know, what I would never say, particularly in the context of a campaign, something that I don't believe government can do. And government can't walk up tomorrow and demand that oil field be closed. We just can't. We can hold them accountable around safety. Dogger's been involved. We could do a lot that we have done. Mm-hmm. But just on the sheer strength, government doesn't have the power or authority to say, close your business tomorrow.
Explain to the folks what Dogger is too, because that's one of those inside baseball acronyms that may go over folks' heads, please.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be able to remember what the acronym
The
stands for.
Department of Oil and Gas, and that's about all I know. It's the
Department
agency.
of Gas. What's the second? I don't remember. It's the state
Geotechnical,
agency.
geothermal, yes.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's the state agency that's actually been renamed, but I still go by Dogger. This administration has renamed it and actually stole UHA from both Long Beach and the city of LA, who is now the director here. And from my perspective, that's a wonderful thing. And so it's the state agency that's responsible for all of the safety, the licensure, and the approval at the state level for oil wells to be functional and operating. And so under the Brown administration, Brown and his director of Dogger weren't as progressive as many of us would have favored. The new administration came on very strong with an executive order to halt all new oil well permitting. He then backtracked on that a little, and some new permits have been issued. And so many of us have asked him for a meeting to talk about what his overall vision and strategy is. But it's certainly my experience thus far that this current administration is much more enviro friendly and progressive when it comes to oil drilling in the state of California.
Great. Any other follow-ups on this point, guys?
So how long, I know you said government does not have the power to shut down a business. So my question is, how long is it going to take to shut down this business?
To shut down oil drilling?
Yes.
The existing, as I understand it, the existing agreement was a part of the plan to transition that property over into the Baldwin Hills Conservancy, was when there was no more oil to be drilled. And the county plays a very different role than the state plays. And so I would be very eager to engage as a county supervisor in a much more proactive way. I think Supervisor Ridley Thomas has been engaged. I know that there was some concerns with some of the county health studies that were done in terms of determining if there really are cancer hotspots around Inglewood. And I just think that there's a different opportunity to engage at the county level, a more proactive way.
And
So, Holly, the idea of no more oil is kind of confusing. Now, I've lived in this same house for 40 years, and there is a pipeline under my home. When I first moved here, I got the checks, okay, from the oil company. However, the amount was much higher than they are today. So we have a dramatic decrease in oil-driven, the oil-driven, if we look at the amount of monies that were paid out in the beginning and the amount of monies that are being paid out now.
I think that's based on the value of a barrel of oil today, which has gone through the floor. And so I don't know that they're still drilling at the same rate that they were 40 years ago. In my first bill I introduced in the assembly, it was asking them to inform us which wells they were fracking, because all wells aren't fracked. We asked questions about what chemicals were used in their fracking solution. And so we were asking very specific questions. And so I'm not sure if they're still drilling at the same rate. I was surprised when they came back to find out that it was a vast minority of the active wells in Inglewood were being fracked. That was not my assumption. I think that wasn't the assumption of the community. But my assumption is the checks are much smaller now because the value of a barrel of oil has gone through the floor.
Let's move
so
on.
are you familiar with this? What's your opinion about this idea of having a barrier?
The 2,500-foot setback?
Is it
Yeah,
100?
it's not enough, but it's better than what we have in Inglewood, with Inglewood being the largest urban oil field in the country. you know, and I was trying to get my colleagues in Kern County and other places to support my bill when I introduced it. You know, their notion was very different. And so we brought into the committee and the assembly floor aerial shots of your neighborhoods. So my colleagues in Kern County could understand, no, I have constituents who live right next door. I appreciate in Kern County, oil drilling is your primary economic engine, but you don't have people living right next door to oil wells. And they are people of color, quite frankly. And so that was, you know, even though those bills didn't get very far, I know that I was helpful in educating some of my colleagues in the legislature about our life experience. You know, they fly into LA, they look down, they don't have the orientation of proximity that all of us do. And so that was a helpful part of some of those early bills. Really trying to educate people that you all live right next door on top of active oil wells.
Right, right.
So to answer your initial question about how my argument differs from Mr. Wesson, I think all of us during the campaign talked about hearing and understanding your concerns and wanting to do all we can to improve, to shut down the wells to the degree that we can. I think everybody was consistent in their messaging.
But you believe it's going to be another 5 years that we're going to have to endure these harmful chemicals in our neighborhood?
I never said 5 years. I said my understanding was the original plan was that they had the right to continue to drill as long as there was oil in the land. And so I don't know how long that will be, but I do think that we should continue the conversation. You know, there have been, since I was first elected in 2010, maybe 6 or 7 different operators of that oil field, and maybe 4 or 5 different owners. It has changed hands.
Right.
Every time I meet with one company, we sit down, I let them know where I am just so they can hear it directly from me. Next thing I know, that there's even a new either owner or operator, and they're different. And so, you know, I don't know if that suggests that property is not lucrative. I don't know why they've had the kind of turnover they have, to be perfectly honest. But I think those are questions we have to continue to raise proactively.
Okay.
All right. I think switching gears a little bit, I think Tony has a question for you, Senator, that concerns economic development and just kind of getting a little bit of feedback from you on your vision for the Windsor Hills View Park area and the Slauson corridor specifically. Tony, you want to roll that one out?
Good evening, Senator.
Good evening.
We were very excited about the redevelopment, revitalization of the Slauson corridor that was discussed back in 2011. And Mark Ridley Thomas had introduced the town center concept. And everyone was very excited and energized about the possibility of a grocery store and other amenities. But then it fell through, and we received what you would call elements of a town center, but not a true redevelopment, revitalization. How would we go about revisiting the redevelopment or revitalization of the Slauson corridor, our commercial corridor?
That's a great question, and I'm so proud of, you know, some of the Black-owned small businesses that outside of a, you know, government-funded corridor expansion have come to Slauson. When you think of those new businesses right there at the Slauson Overhill intersection, I think it's a wonderful thing. And, you know, one tough thing that happened in 2011, and I'm not sure if it was redevelopment dollars that were going to be used for this corridor, but, you know, the state under Jerry Brown stepped away from redevelopment. He felt that there was excessive abuse of redevelopment programs and dollars across the state, and eliminated the program wholesale. That was difficult for LA County. That's what slowed the acquisition of all of the parcels in the Santa Barbara Plaza, and took extra time, even though that has been a parcel that has been plagued for decades with false starts and stops. You know, and what concerns me with this current public health and economic pandemic that we're now experiencing is, you know, in January, we were sitting on double-digit billions in the black. And in 60 days, that's all evaporated. And so what concerns me is about the recovery, the economic recovery for the state of California. And if state and local government, not if, but when the state and local government will have public dollars to invest again. And I emphasize public because, you know, throughout this campaign and throughout my experience serving you all now in the state Senate, there's lots of conversation about gentrification and who has the resources and who's coming into historic communities, buying property, both commercial and private, developing it, and then who has access to those resources. And so if government isn't in a position to fund, you know, corridor expansion, then who is? So that gives me cause for real concern. You know, but I got to tell you, as chair of the Senate Budget Committee, I'm sitting on a budget with a $54 billion deficit. And how we dig ourselves out of that as a state is going to be difficult. 4.5 million California residents have applied for unemployment insurance just since March 12th. And so one could argue that construction and those kind of developments brings jobs to our community. That's true. And so hopefully the federal government will be able to step in. You know, the Slauson corridor isn't necessarily a shovel-ready project. And I don't know all the details about why that plan fell through. Frankly, this is the first time someone has posed this question to me throughout the campaign. And so I will follow up and do my homework to figure out what happened there. My assumption is it was the elimination of redevelopment at the state that took some of the potential for state investment away, that they had to walk away from it. But there have been other areas and other corridors that have continued development and expansion in the Second District, the Watts-Willowbrook expansion. There have been others. So I'll have to do my homework and figure out what happened to Slauson.
Tony, anybody have any follow-up?
No, I appreciate her answer.
Absolutely. Just to put a little finer point on it, Senator, that our area is kind of unique because we touch City of LA, and in fact, along Slauson, you know, as you go from Overhill going east to Angeles Vista, you actually cross from the county to the city midway through that breezeway as you're going, you know, on the north side of Slauson.
Right.
So I think to your point, you know, that made the effort to revitalize that more difficult because you're dealing with unincorporated county and CD8.
Right.
And then of course the redevelopment thing went away and so forth. So it's challenging. I think it's, you know, clearly one of those situations where whatever tools can be deployed to facilitate that, we should look at that.
I agree. The Watts-Willowbrook, you know, expansion is in the unincorporated area of LA County. And so, you know, there was a development there. There's a development going on right now. Transit-oriented housing around the Watts train station. And so developments are occurring on county property. But again, I'll have to go back and see what I can find out about the Slauson piece.
Right. You touched on something in your answer to Tony's question, and I'll run with it a little bit. This whole tension and friction between, you know, these are traditionally African-American, predominantly African-American communities where we live and have businesses, and then the need for, you know, new development, other groups coming in, you know, kind of displacing us in our position of strength in the community. What do you look toward as far as being somebody that's thinking about being a supervisor, as far as tools you can deploy to try to balance those, you know, I don't know if you want to call them competing interests, but just interests that kind of butt heads from time to time?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. You know, from my perspective, gentrification is an issue of economics. It's a scenario where largely for Black people, our incomes and salaries haven't kept pace with others, as well as making sure that our children have educational opportunities to be able to get degrees, get well-paying jobs, and continue to stay and live in the communities that they grew up in. It's also an economic issue because, you know, a Miss Jones, a fictional Miss Jones, if you will, who lives in Windsor Hills or View Park, you know, was a school teacher or a postal worker 50, 60 years ago, bought that house like many of my parents' friends, and now she's ready to retire and move out. I also believe that Miss Jones has the right to get fair market value for her property that she's maintained and kept up all these years. So the rub comes in, Miss Jones is entitled to fair market value, but who that looks like me in my generation or younger is in a position to buy that house from Miss Jones for fair market value. And so we get outbid. And so the issue really is looking at financial institutions that are continuing to redline in terms of who they are willing to give loans and mortgages to, and our ability to afford it. And so it's holding the financial institutions accountable. It's looking at new economic engines coming into all of Supervisorial District 2, much like what we're experiencing right now in the true boom in Culver City. The difference for me is not wanting new enterprise to come in and displace residents in terms of being able to benefit from those new economic engines. You know, when Silicon Valley Beach came in, people traveled into Culver City to get those jobs. You know,
Right.
My goal would be to make sure that local residents would be trained and prepared to move into that new enterprise and have first right of refusal in terms of people coming into our community and taking the jobs. So that's why I say it's about economics. It's holding financial and lending institutions accountable. It's making sure that, frankly, Black people are in a strong enough position financially to be able to afford those homes. I talked about on the campaign trail in the primary, you know, this whole notion of having public entities that could buy Miss Jones' home at fair market value and hold it in trust. And so it's not a developer who will come in, buy it, and flip it and pull the asset out of our community. And so there are any kind of models that are being sampled all over the country. In Oakland, they've got one of these public trusts that's buying houses back from private lenders and banks and creating opportunities for community people to be able to afford to buy them. So to hold the property in trust, in public trust, with the eye on supporting local long-term residents of maintaining the ownership of that property. And then I'll say to you all, I think the more difficult kind of conversation that we have a responsibility to have at the community level and the family level, and that is really making sure that the next generation understands the value of ownership. Because we wouldn't have gentrification if we weren't selling to people who didn't look like us. And how we begin to have that conversation. We've got to explain the value of what it means, the pride it has given all of us to be able to identify pockets in LA County that are African-American communities and what responsibility we take individually and collectively to maintain them.
Excellent point.
Yes.
Any other follow-up on that?
John, I assume we're going to discuss the whole issue of the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Plaza separately. There's something related to affordable housing that impacts that, but do you want to keep that for a different question?
No, you brought it up, bro. Go ahead and run with it.
Okay, well, Senator, I'm curious to know, I mean, obviously you're familiar with what's going on or not going on with Crenshaw Plaza. So, yeah, my question is, what's your position on the status of Capri's ownership or non-ownership, the new potential owner, CIM, and the ongoing community pressing for affordable housing in that area, and what you see is the future given the impact on retail generally, and now, of course, the impact even further with regard to the pandemic?
Yes, I appreciate the question. You know, we saw this happen to the West Side Pavilion, where the people in that immediate area were asking for housing. And that mall is now going to be a business park, and Google will take over, I think, the entire West Side Pavilion. And so now residents in that area, because my current Senate district encompasses that community, are crying out, where are these new thousands of employees now going to live? And so there's continues to be an issue and a concern around displacement. I fully support the new kind of infill model of a piece of property that large being converted to housing. You know, I would love to see it become, you know, multi-use housing, both single family homes, you know, duplexes. I'm a huge duplex, triplex, fourplex fan in terms of expanding our housing stock on a single footprint. I'd love to see, you know, mixed use given the acreage of the Baldwin Hills Mall. I don't think it's in our collective best interest as a community that entire property be converted to a business park. I just don't. I see from the buyer's perspective, because when they finish that train on Crenshaw, it's going to be amazing that people would be able to take public transit, get off and be at work. I don't think that is in our collective best interest. I've been in communication with and heard the teletown hall from community members who want to purchase it. You know, it appears as if the sellers are taking a loss, what they paid for it, and the $35 million they put in to redevelop it versus what they supposedly sold it to CIM. My question is, if the community could gather together the resources to buy it, then will we have the resources to develop it? And who will be kind of in the driver's seat of that conversation? Because even early on when we were talking about housing, from my experience, there was a difference of opinion in the community about housing and deep concerns about traffic if housing units were placed there. So I think, I know I hear you. I think that we need to have, excuse me, that was 13-year-old golden retriever telling me it's dinner time. He talks, as you can tell. I think we have to continue to have conversations, you know, amongst ourselves and figure out what it should be. But I happen to believe housing is a better option for our neighborhoods than a business park.
Yes, yes.
But you're saying not exclusive housing.
Say it again now.
Not exclusively housing. You think that there
Right.
still should be retail, a mall there, or what?
Oh, I you know, before the pandemic, I might have said yes. I think we have to figure out what retail is going to look like coming out of this pandemic.
Yep.
Should there be basic services that we need? Market, drugstore, restaurants, yes. But I don't know what malls are going to look like when we come out of this.
So
I'm going to give you 1 second to open the door, but I can hear you. So ask your question.
Go ahead, Senator. We'll wait for you.
Yeah, we can relate.
Yeah, we got to make sure the golden retrievers are taken care of.
Sorry about that.
That's no
Yeah,
problem.
I was going to say, given that, you know, I kind of was triggered from Tony's question about the Slauson corridor to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's county and city, and obviously that's, you know, not necessarily in your purview, but what's your take on how you'd be able to work with your counterparts in the city? Because obviously there's things that are in the city that are in and around our area that impacts our quality of life. Mm-hmm. We're concerned about how would you have an impact on that, and how would you see your role in relationship to supporting our interests as a county supervisor on projects that are in the city?
I think probably very similar to how come on, Rusty, how I manage my relationship with those at the county and the city now as your state senator, to have a, you know, collaborative relationship, to be vocal and present, to talk about shared interests and priorities. You know, in most instances, we all agree more than we disagree, particularly when it comes to, you know, critical issues around economics, because we're hearing from you, we have shared constituency. And so I've got a strong working relationship with my colleagues. I represent currently in the Senate at the city level, 8, 9, 10, some of 4, some of 1. And my Senate district is largely contained pretty exclusively in the 2nd Supervisorial District, and I have a piece of Hilda Solis. And so those are ongoing collaborative relationships. Talked to Supervisor Ridley Thomas over the weekend over some concerns around the state budget and funding for King Hospital. And so, you know, we all step up to the plate when it comes to meeting the needs of our shared constituency. And that would continue from my perspective.
And you brought up the issue of community-owned land and, you know, different projects being thrown around in relationship to what we ultimately do with the property. Do you have a take on what different community folks are talking about doing with that land and trying to collaborate to purchase it and put it in some kind of a land trust and so forth? Are you familiar with that?
When you say the land, you're talking about the mall?
Exactly, yes.
Yes, yeah, we've been in conversations, and I said my perspective again is it's great to assemble the resources to purchase. The next step is assembling the resources to develop. Because what I would not want to have happen is a 2-decade-long
repeat
like Santa Barbara Plaza.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. A repeat of that.
You know, and there's plenty of blame to go around on Santa Barbara Plaza. You know, egos got involved, the economy tanked, then redevelopment went away. I hope that we learn from that experience. And like I said, the conversation can't stop with just purchasing the land. We also have to talk about how we would finance development.
Right. And Senator,
and to be frank with you, that's the piece I haven't heard. I've heard conversations around, let's all rally around and buy it. I can get down with that. The question is, how do we develop it? And I want that to be a part of the global conversation as well.
right.
And it has to be.
But you see, one of your primary things that you would encourage is housing. Is that the primary thrust that you'd be interested in for that property?
When I look at the housing need number statewide, we are 500,000 units short based on need today.
However,
say it again.
excuse me, Holly, but the problem with the numbers is that housing in itself, the people that can afford the particular units that have being built now,
I agree.
doesn't compare. I mean, there's no comparison whatsoever. So your need does not match what they're building. They're building high rises for income that's way above the constituents of which you are accounting for.
Couldn't agree with you more. And that's happening right in my district. Those 3 high-rise that were built on Figueroa, I keep threatening my staff that I'm gonna do a personal door-to-door survey. I'm gonna knock on everybody's door and say, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah.
Because I can't believe that those 3, that they could justify building those 3 high-rise at the rate that they're gonna charge. We can talk about the high-rise on La Cienega Boulevard.
Oh, yes.
That 30-story behemoth. You know, at the state level, we don't approve developments. That's not what I've done. And I think those at the city level, frankly, who it's within their jurisdiction of their current positions, need to explain to all of us how those projects were approved and why so little attention has been paid to true affordability.
Right.
So I agree with you. The need is still there, the 500,000 units. The percentage of those units that need to be truly affordable is what's in question. And so I would believe that given the size of that parcel, that we could have what it's not the best terminology, but it's, you know, when I say mixed use, I mean, you know, mixed income that you know, we're not building projects. That is not what social scientists and urban planners recommend anymore. but we build both affordable and true mixed use.
Yes.
That includes green space, that it's a true planned community. That's
Yeah.
what I love to see there.
Yes.
That
Yes.
it may be some starter homes, like I said, some multi-family dwellings, some duplexes or what have you, as well as apartments, all of which meet the need of the socioeconomic needs of the people who live in that community. That's hard to do. Developers try to come to us and convince us every day that they can't pencil those out. That's where government can step in and intervene. We know the primary components to housing affordability is the cost of the land, materials, and labor. Well, the role government can play is making the land available and affordable, if not free.
Yeah.
What government can do is to give tax breaks when appropriate, when it is in exchange for something for the public good, which is affordable housing. We don't have full control over, the value or the price of materials and labor, but land is an area where government can certainly be directly involved and intervene.
And how would you say we would know that you are committed to putting the community's interests first before developers? We know we've had our issues with the developers in our community, and so we look at them very carefully. And so how do we know and can trust the fact that you'll always put the interests of the community first?
I appreciate that honest question. I'm going to give you as honest an answer as I can. I would ask that you look at my 10-year track record. I would acknowledge that I don't think I've received any donations of size from developers, because I don't think they perceive me, or I don't think they perceive me as someone who would necessarily be their advocate. I would proudly suggest that you look at the kind of bills I've carried, the kind of issues I've made a priority. And I would argue that kind of midstream in one's political career, I don't intend to change now. I was happy and quite content as CEO of Crystal Stairs when I, some would argue, lost my mind and decided to run for public office. To take a pay cut, to manage my personal life and raise my family and live in 2 cities, Sacramento and in LA, to come to a job with no pension, one would argue why. And it's because I fundamentally believe then, and I believe today, that I have a skill set, I have a commitment and drive and a sense of personal integrity that I felt my community deserved and needed to have in their representatives. I see myself as a member of the next generation, quite frankly, of African-American leaders that has some experience under my belt, has negotiated, managed this will be my 4th state budget, all in the context of my colleagues, as reported in the LA Times, referring to me as the conscience of the legislature. That honored me deeply because it came from my colleagues. And I can't say that on every issue, every time, every member of the community will feel that I put their interests first. I don't know that that's possible to do with 2 million constituents. But I can say that I will always be forthcoming. I will tell the community the position I've taken and why. And I'm not so stubborn and hard-headed that I've not been willing to, based on the acquisition of new information, change my mind. And honestly, openly admit to that as well.
We appreciate that, Senator. And in the few minutes we have left, since you mentioned stubbornness and hard-headedness, let me ask you real fast for your take and your, say, if you could put yourself in the position right now of being on the board and having to deal with the hostile relationship between the sheriff and the members of the Board of Supervisors currently, what would you suggest direct, advise? What course would you take to try to resolve this mess that we find ourselves in, where we as a community feel like our public safety is being used as a political chip in a high stakes poker game between these 6 elected officials? Talk to us about that for a minute, if you would.
And I believe that is exactly what happened with the sheriff's declaration that he was going to close the Marina Satellite Sheriff Station. You know, it's a lesson to all of us as voters that everything that glitters is not gold, and we have a collective responsibility to do what we are doing today. And I appreciate you all taking the time and your thoughtfulness in your questions to ask all the questions. I didn't endorse him. I appreciated why Black Lives Matter and so many, you know, were drawn to him, because we thought anything was better than what we had. And now we are finding that that is not the case. I support the board's decisions and the actions they've taken. I think that he, quite frankly, has acted irresponsibly as a leader. I think that many of the campaign promises and commitments he said to us, particularly as the Black community, I've not seen evidence of those issues continuing to be a priority once he was elected and took office. For any elected official, I think, you know, those first 100 days are critical. That's because that's for any new job. Your first 100 days, you do first what's most important to you. And for his initial actions to be to replace people who were removed for a cause with all of the work that a sheriff needs to do in LA County, let me know initially that we had a problem. And so I think the board is doing what they can in trying to deal with a duly elected individual. However, they control the purse string. And so I think that they're going to engage in this dance, as elected bodies sometimes do, because everybody's trying to assert their perspective and power. I think that once the board has declared that the Oversight Commission does have subpoena power, I think that was a courageous move on behalf of the board, and a notion that I had endorsed and supported all along. And I think that we as a community have to hold him accountable for actions that he's taking that aren't in our best interest. I believe the men and women who are in uniform and do that work every day are to be respected. But I think he is playing politics, and he's playing a very dangerous game.
Without a doubt. What about the members of the board and their role in this, and the fact that they've got some discretionary funds at their disposal? Do you see any opportunities for them to kind of take the high road and say, listen, let's sit down and work this out and figure out a way? Clearly there's issues at a historic level with budget deficits, we get that. But in terms of the Marina and the Altadena station, and really targeting unfairly those 2 small stations, I would think that the group of them could sit down and work that out. What do you think?
We see, I don't think it's a money issue. I think he's playing politics. They passed the budget. He got a cut like many county departments did. He chose to manage his budget in that way. And so what they have to figure out is, when you don't have, oversight and control in terms of how he manages his budget, but you control his overall budget, how do you facilitate that? I know they have discretionary funds. I don't know that they have discretionary funds deep enough to maintain a sheriff's substation, nor should they have to. So how they figure out how to engage in conversation that he doesn't politicize. Case in point, he claimed that they were being inappropriately punitive by removing him from his position as head of the emergency response team. Well, that's a trend that's happening nationally all over the country, that as that has become a true area of expertise, like our director of the Office of Emergency Services here, our director doesn't have a law enforcement lens. He has an emergency management lens that encompasses health and public safety and infrastructure. And so the point was, they made that decision long before it was actually implemented, based on new national thinking about that area of expertise, emergency response and services. And so he blew it up, but that wasn't the case. It wasn't about him. It was about that transition was going to take place, whoever was sheriff. And so I really deeply am concerned about him politicizing the fights, declaring their fights when they aren't really fights, and how they manage it. It's not going to be easy.
Mm.
So what would you do if you were in the position right now?
Inquiring minds want to know, right?
I know you're going to be ready on day one, so you know.
Right.
I appreciate you. The problem that all of us are Monday morning quarterbacking, and all of us are basing our opinions on what we read in the paper. I don't have the inside track in terms of what the budget was, if they really cut him so deep that he had no other choice. I don't know that. And so that's why it's so important. On the first day, my first 100 days would be spent assembling a dynamic team that is from the community, respects the community, shares my values, who would be my eyes and ears out there amongst 2 million, and doing my deep homework to really understand the fiscal health of the county. One of the negatives people try to use against me as a candidate was like, Holly's a policy wonk. She can't land deals. Well, I believe it takes a policy wonk who understands all of the nuts and bolts of an operation to be able to land a deal that's in the best interest of everybody. And so given that reputation that I have of burrowing deep, I would need to do that to really understand what all my options are available to me. But I just don't think at this point I have enough information to say so.
Right. At this point, it sounds like you're suggesting there really is not much recourse the board has. And so if you won election, you're in that position, and the sheriff had gone through with his plan to fully close these stations, there's probably not much you could do about it.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not sure what percentage of his budget they cut. I don't know if there was a way that they could have reduced line items, so they would have limited the amount of control he had. Case in point, as chair of the budget committee, while we allocate resources to whole departments, 2 departments in particular at the state level that are under immense pressure, the DMV and EDD. So while we approved their budget, we also forced them to make decisions around new computer systems, to expand staff, to expand staff training based on what we knew to be the needs of those departments. Mm-hmm. And so I'm assuming they have that same kind of power and autonomy when they approve a budget, that they can make specific appropriations based on a line item. Mm-hmm. And so if that were the case, and I were on the board, and I were chair of the budget committee, those are the kinds of issues I would look at to make sure that, quite frankly, he wouldn't make decisions that put the county as a whole at risk.
Well, Senator Mitchell, it is, we try to stay true to our time, and we're about an hour or so into it. So we really appreciate you. Anything else that you want to leave us with? Any parting thoughts or comments or anything before?
I appreciate, sorry for cutting you off. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you this evening. I'll just say that I'm very proud of the strong position I came in the primary, to have been outspent by Mr. Wesson 3-1, and to be able to come in within 1 percentage point of him. I won most of the city of LA. I won the majority of the city council districts that fall within the second supervisorial district. And quite frankly, I only came in about 400 and change votes short in his own council district. And so I think that I proved to be a much more competitive opponent than perhaps Mr. Wesson assumed. Proud to have had the LA Times endorsement, proud of the article their editorial board wrote in terms of why they felt I was the best candidate at this time for this community. I'm a native Angelino, born and raised in the second district, and I'm clear that the second district has amazing assets. You all live in a community that's a perfect example of an amazing asset in that district. I also know that the district needs fearless, courageous leadership to demand equity. Not equality, equity for the unique needs of the people who live and work in that community. I think COVID has simply amplified the systemic fissures that many of us know have already existed. And so the next supervisor has a unique opportunity to drive that train straight through all of those issues. You know, it was wonderful that Supervisor Ridley Thomas fought so hard to reopen King. And the fact that King fell into disarray and closed in the first place, from my humble opinion, was criminal. That's a community, as all communities, that should have access to high quality, affordable, culturally competent and relevant healthcare services. The Second District continues to lag behind in terms of access to healthcare at the community level. Our diabetes rates are higher than anywhere else in the county. The vast majority of the children in the foster care system at the county level come from the Second District. The vast majority of the, conservatively speaking, 60,000 unhoused LA County-wide come from the Second District. So we have work to do. And while I think Supervisor Ridley Thomas has been a visionary leader in many areas, what I know for certain is we cannot afford to go backwards. That we need somebody who's going to keep her foot on the accelerator, pushing forward to meet the needs of the Second Supervisorial District. And I humbly believe I am the one. And so I hope that in your deliberations, that you will look at my record, make a judgment call based on the deliverables I have brought to my constituents over the last 10 years. And I hope that you will consider supporting me.
Outstanding.
Outstanding.
I know I speak for everybody when I say thanks, Senator, for taking the time. We really appreciate you for doing this and for all that you do to serve our district and our state. Anybody else want to share any sentiments?
One last thing, at the risk of destroying John's impeccable record at being on time. On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad would you say you want this particular job?
20.
Good answer.
That answered that.
Holly, I do,
Okay.
Senator.
Okay.
No, 20.
You got me on that one.
If you just give me a quick, second. If you,
Sure.
my parents met as eligibility workers working for the Department of Public Social Services. So as a very young child, all the adults in my life either worked for the county or they were on the county.
Okay.
And my parents, and I say that with great respect because I didn't see a difference. You follow me?
Yeah, I got you.
Yes.
What that
Yes.
said to me, and what that memory speaks to about me is that I understood very young that the role of government was to help people who needed it. And people who worked for government, your job was to help people. And I think that's a very oversimplified way to really explain my entire professional career, which has been spent entirely working for government or nonprofit organizations that serve people in my community. So from the Black Women's Health Project to Crystal Stairs to the Western Center on Law and Poverty, the times my job has been outside of government, my job has still been to focus on providing resources and services to working families and their children. That's how I've spent my entire career, and that's how I intend to end my career. Bringing it home to LA County, the most populous county in the state, with the largest African-American population, the county with 1/3 of the state's children. Those are all of the issues I spent my entire professional career working on behalf of. I'm a policy wonk and proud of it because it's governmental decisions that impact the lives of too many of us. COVID has certainly unearthed that for many people who otherwise might not have believed so. That's why I am so passionate about this position at this time. This next supervisor is going to be in the catbird seat to really help guide what the Second District looks like for the next generation or two.
Yes.
Investments using Measure R, Measure M. There are unique opportunities. What the next county jail looks like, how that will be constructed, how people who look like us are serviced, are prevented from going into that system. This is an interesting time in the county's history to have the opportunity to weigh in on those decisions that will have multi-generational impact. That's very important to me on a deeply personal level as a third-generation Native, and I think I have the skill set to drive that train.
Very good.
That's why it's a 20, Mr. Grayson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Holly. Thank
Senator
you,
Mitchell, I do
Senator.
appreciate that thorough answer.
And we do appreciate all the good work that you've been doing.
Thank you.
We do.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
That puts an exclamation point behind it, guys. Thanks, Senator. Go ahead and take care. Is it Rusty? Is that your golden
It's
retriever?
Rusty, yeah.
All right, yeah.
Check that out. You saw him circling around behind me.
Yes.
Check that out. He has to go out and inspect the block. He looks up and down the street and makes sure everything is okay. So now he's back here laying down.
There you go. Well, listen,
Thank
have a
you.
good,
Thank
have
you
a
so
good night.
much.
Keep up the great work, okay?
Thank you very much for your time. It was wonderful seeing everybody. And everyone, please stay safe.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys, I'm going to stop the recording.